For those recording the history of Kenya impartially, without fear of favor, the date June 25th, 2024 will be a chapter on its own, because so many things have happened today. But more importantly, something major has changed, because the course of the history of our country has crossed a major line today. Spiritually speaking, something today in Kenya has changed forever. And I'm not being insensitive, because very many bad things have happened today. There has been loss of lives, precious Kenyan lives, and to make matters worse, these were young lives. And to make matters worse, this very senseless loss of precious lives was completely avoidable. It could have been avoided. In summary, there were protests in most parts of the country, and there was also trouble, injury, loss of lives in some of those parts of the country. But the really major developments were in the capital of the motherland, Nairobi. You know, it was also a strange day, because it started so peacefully, and I was sure that the day was going to end peacefully. But that is not what happened. Protesters, most of them Gen Zs, gained entry right inside Parliament. And this was after some security boys on the roofs of buildings had picked out and taken out some demonstrators outside Parliament. We don't have the exact official numbers of those who left us today. Now, in the same Parliament, as the protests were going on, and as the protesters were coming closer and closer to Parliament, legislators took the controversial finance bill one stage further, passing amendments that removed some controversial parts of this bill. Controversial because many Kenyans had complained about them. And Azimio MPs in the House refused to participate in these amendments. Even some of the amendments they had earlier proposed, they refused to present. They refused to take part in this process of the 2024 finance bill. And after they voted in a vote they lost, the 108 Azimio MPs walked out of the floor of the House as the protesters got closer and closer to Parliament. And in the end, the members of Parliament escaped, most of them, through the recently constructed underground tunnel that leads out of Parliament into an adjacent building. And the protesters finally gained entry into Parliament, and they even had lunch there. Now, if we were to start looking for somebody to blame for what has happened today, the Kenya Kwanza government has to be at the top of the list, for a very simple reason. The people are angry about a piece of legislation, but then you continue with the process of passing that legislation, confirming to them that their opinion does not really matter. I mean, you go ahead with this finance bill when you already know people all over the country are protesting against it. Now, if that is not provocation, then I confess I don't know the meaning of that word. You know, the Ancient of Days, in case you didn't know, works with the very minute details. Things happen which may not seem very important, but they have far-reaching, critical, game-changing consequences that usually follow shortly after. I believe that is the best way of summarizing June 25th, 2024. Vocal lawyer and senior counsel Donald Kipkorir had the following to say, very telling words. He said that the Gen Zs have succeeded where Raila Odinga failed, where those fighting for the second liberation failed, where all those heroes of the past to liberate our country failed. They have gone beyond all those Kenyans we admire who came before us. I leave it to you to try and figure out what Bwana Kipkorir was actually trying to tell us. What he actually meant with those words of his. But all I can say is that on this day, something very major has changed in Kenya. And it has changed forever. You see, these Gen Zs are just crazy. Because where most of us would stop, hesitate, and reason, they don't. In fact, lawyer Kipkorir, at the tail end of his remarks, said, these Gen Zs are not people you can ignore. Something to that effect. There is no way you can ignore them. Whatever you think about them. And what has happened is that a lot of those legislators who have been voting yes have seen the wrath. Some of them have suffered personally the wrath of the electorate over their decision concerning this bill. And indeed, that has to be one of the things that has changed on this terrible day. Going forward, I think legislators will think twice about passing bills without consulting the electorate, about passing bills because the executive has ordered them to do so, which is against the Constitution, or even passing bills based on the cash, the money, the bribe they have received. Going forward, they will now have to think twice. And so, even if old habits die hard, they will still have to think twice and maybe tremble. Because the truth is, when you're elected by the people, you're supposed to do what the people want. And today exposed parliamentarians to the entire world that indeed the people we elect are not doing what the people want. Because the people are outside protesting countrywide against what the people they elected were doing in parliament. Does that make sense to you? But now we are at the mercy of the executive as to what is going to happen next. And we are also at the mercy of the character of the executive. My hope and my prayer is that in future, when Kenyans go to cast their vote, the first thing they will look at is at the character of the person they're electing. The character is so terribly important. And now, we are at the mercy of the character of William Samoei Ruto. Whether we like it or not, that is the reality. And I'm afraid, based on what we have seen in the past, that is not good news. Now, whatever your opinion is about this day, we must all agree that what has happened today, the way the Gen Zs have behaved, the way the people of Kenya have behaved, is not normal. Okay? Indeed, if you observe carefully the events of the last few days, the last week or so, the only conclusion you can come to is that there's definitely something here that does not make sense. You know, somebody can say something so crazy which does not make sense, especially to those of us who are the majority who do not understand the spiritual. However, a time can come when these crazy things which are being said are the only things that even make some sense. I recently heard a man who has been predicting all these things unfolding in Kenya, indeed started predicting them over 2 years ago. I heard him say that the Gen Z are the army of the Ancient of Days. And the whole objective is for the Ancient of Days to shame and bring down the powerful. To show the powerful that they did wrong and that they are nothing to him. And so if indeed this is true, then the reaction of the powerful to the events of today does not matter. The conclusion of this matter will still be the same. The preordained, predestined same. The implication is that this is a total, complete cleanup of the system and the country called Kenya. June the 25th, 2024, a very terrible day that signaled change for the long-suffering Kenyan. Change in the country called Kenya. But the question is that change going to be positive for that long-suffering Kenyan? Only time will tell. Now, very quickly before I go, in my previous video, I spoke about Joey's dad, actually his late dad, who has always held on firmly to the belief that his son is completely innocent. Well, I have a very sensitive, actually 2 very sensitive special reports that reveal who the real killers and the real killer of the late Monica Kimani is highly likely to be. You don't want to miss this crazy information. You know, very early on, shortly after this murder of Monica Kimani that shocked Kenyans, I released some very sensitive information to a limited audience then. I believe this was in 2018, and I was going through that information and I was shocked at the accuracy of that information and how things panned out, because this was before anybody had been charged for the crime. At that time we only had suspects. Nobody had been taken to court yet. And that information tells you very clearly who the real murderer was, and solidifies the theory that Joey was simply framed, a fall guy. And this information names names, both the powers behind it and the person who executed it. Now, for the super curious and the people who want to know, about only 20 people tops are making available to them these highly sensitive special reports. Actually, there are 2 of them for only $15 or Kenya shillings 1,999. And therefore, if you're interested in knowing the sad thing that happened to Joey, because it could happen to anybody, you can use the information you see on your screens right now to get your hands on this crazy information. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.